Mary woke before the sun, not because she wanted to, but because the city never truly slept. Even in the early gray hours, New York in 1857 was already alive. Horses moved along the cobblestone streets below, their hooves striking stone in a steady rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a cart rattled, and a Mana Euro's voice called out fresh bread. Mary lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling above her, listening, letting herself remember where she was. The bed beneath her was narrow and uneven, stuffed with horsehair that shifted when she moved. A thin wool blanket rested over her legs, worn smooth in some places and scratchy in others. The sheet smelled faintly of lavender water, a weak attempt to hide the deeper scent of age and dampness. The room was cold. Coal was expensive, and the fire downstairs would not be lit for hours yet. Mary pulled the blanket closer and breathed slowly, knowing this quiet moment would not last. She shared the room with another woman, Lily, who slept on the bed across from hers. Lilia Eurus's breathing was deep and steady, the sound soft and familiar. Mary turned her head slightly and watched her for a moment. She had seen many girls come and go in this house over the past 2 years. Some left for better places. Some left sick. Some simply vanished, swallowed again by the streets they had tried to escape. Mary sat up slowly and let her feet touch the floor. The wood was icy beneath her skin, sending a sharp reminder through her body that winter had not yet loosened its grip. She reached for the wool shawl, hanging from the bedpost, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The weight of it was comforting, like a quiet promise that she would make it through another day. On the small table between the beds sat a chipped pitcher and basin. The water inside had a thin skin of ice. Mary broke it with her finger and splashed her face. The cold shocked her awake, stealing her breath for a second before it settled again. She welcomed the feeling. It reminded her she was still alive. The walls were covered in faded floral paper, peeling at the corners where dampness crept in from the outside. The air carried a mix of smells that never truly went away. Coal smoke from countless chimneys, mud and waste from the nearby streets, and beneath it all, perfume, sweet and artificial, a working scent. This was a brothel tucked into a narrow street near the theaters and taverns. Not the finest house, but not the worst either. Clean enough, orderly, run by a woman who believed rules kept chaos away. Mary had learned quickly that structure was what separated survival from ruin. They called her Mary here. It was not the name her mother gave her, but it was the name that belonged to this life. The name that paid for meals and warmth. She accepted it without much thought now. As she dressed in her plain morning clothes, Maria Euro's mind drifted back to how she had arrived here. Not through force, not through scandal. A quiet knock came at the door. A young voice followed, cheerful and soft. "Hot water, miss?" Mary opened the door to find Betsy, the housemaid, barely 13 and trying hard to look older. Betsy poured the steaming water into the basin with care, her face red from the effort. "Thank you," Mary said, offering a smile. The girl beamed and hurried away. Mary washed slowly, savoring the warmth against her skin. Outside, the city grew louder. More carts, more voices. The day pressing in. Soon, the house would move into its rhythm, cleaning, waiting, receiving, performing for now. Though Mary allowed herself one last quiet breath. She wrapped the shawl tighter, feeling the solid floor beneath her feet, and prepared to step into another day she had learned how to survive. By midday, the house had fully awakened, and the quiet softness of the morning was gone. The fire burned steadily now, warming the front rooms where customers would soon sit and wait. Mary moved through the house with a cloth in her hand, dusting shelves and polishing glassware. The work was simple, repetitive, and oddly calming. Her hands moved without much thought, leaving her mind free to drift. From the front window, she could see the street below. Carriages passed in a constant flow, splashing through muddy ruts left by last night a Euro's rain. Men in dark coats hurried along the sidewalks. Women carried baskets, children darted between adults, and vendors shouted their goods with practiced rhythm. Life pressed on, unaware of the quiet transactions happening behind closed doors. Mary finished the parlor and carried the cloth back to the kitchen. The housekeeper nodded at her approval. The smell of bread and stew filled the space, heavy and comforting. Food was one of the reasons this house was better than many others. No one went hungry here. Mary remembered too clearly what hunger felt like to ever take that for granted. The doctor arrived shortly after noon. His visit marked by a subtle shift in the Hausjurl's mood. The girls grew quieter, more serious. Each of them would be examined in turn, a weekly ritual that carried both relief and fear. Mary waited her turn, sitting on a straight-backed chair, hands folded in her lap. When she was finally called in, she stood, smoothed her skirt, and followed. The examination was brief and professional. The doctor asked a few questions, checked her breathing, her eyes, her skin. His manner was calm, practiced, almost gentle. When it was over, he nodded once and made a note in his book. Mary was clear for another week. She exhaled slowly as she left the room, tension easing from her shoulders. The afternoon passed quietly. One customer arrived, a man who wanted little more than company and conversation. Mary sat beside him, listening as he spoke about his work and his worries. She nodded at the right moments, asked small questions, offered smiles when expected. It was a performance she knew well, and when it ended, she cleaned the room, washed herself, and returned to the kitchen for tea. Later, during a lull, Mary stepped outside for a short errand. The cool air felt good against her face as she walked to the nearby shops. Inside the brothel, every movement was watched, every role defined. Outside, she was just another woman on the street. No one looked at her twice. That small freedom mattered more than she liked to admit. She returned with hairpins and paper, small, ordinary purchases that helped her feel connected to a life beyond the house. By the time she stepped back inside, the light had begun to change. Shadows grew longer. Lamps were lit. The house was preparing for evening. Upstairs, the women changed into their finer dresses, helping one another with buttons and pins. Silk rustled softly as Mary slipped into her blue evening gown. The fabric felt cool and smooth against her skin. She adjusted her hair, added a touch of color to her cheeks, and dabbed lavender water at her wrists. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Polished, composed, ready. Dinner was served early. The girls ate together, sharing quiet talk and tired smiles. There was laughter, too, brief and soft, the kind that came from shared understanding. When the meal ended, the house shifted again. This was the moment between calm and demand, a breath before the night began. The first knock came just after 8, then another. Mary took her place in the parlor, sitting straight-backed in her chair, hands folded lightly in her lap. The fire glowed warmly, casting soft light across the room. When her name was called, she stood smoothly and followed the madam to meet her guest. He was polite and nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he held his glass. Mary guided the conversation gently, easing his discomfort with practiced warmth. Upstairs, the encounter was brief and unremarkable. When it ended, she performed the familiar routine of washing and resetting the room, each movement efficient and careful. The evening continued like this, one visitor blending into the next. Some stayed longer, wanting conversation. Some spoke little. Mary gave each what they sought, or what they believed they sought. By the time the clock neared midnight, Her body felt heavy with exhaustion. Her feet ached. Her smile came more slowly now. At last, the madam announced that no more guests were expected. Relief washed through the house. Mary climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last. In her room, she undressed carefully, setting aside the blue silk that had served its purpose. She slipped into her nightdress, the plain cotton feeling like mercy against her skin. Lily was already in bed, brushing out her hair. They exchanged a few quiet words, nothing heavy. There was no need. Some things did not require explanation. Mary lay down, pulling the blanket over herself. The mattress creaked softly as she settled in. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the window. Mary closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The day had taken much from her, but it had given her something too: food, shelter. Another night survived. As sleep pulled her under, she let go of the role she played and rested in the simple truth of being alive. The storm outside grew stronger as the night deepened. Rain beating steadily against the window and wind pressing softly at the walls. Inside the small room, the air was warm and still. Mary lay on her back, staring into the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere below, a floorboard creaked. A door closed. Then silence returned. Sleep came in waves, not all at once. Her body was tired enough, but her mind drifted, moving gently through the day she had just lived. Faces blurred together. Voices faded into low echoes. Eventually, her breathing slowed, and she slipped into a deep, dreamless rest. Morning arrived quietly. Mary woke to pale light slipping through the thin curtains. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed and muted. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then the familiar shapes of the room came into focus. The low ceiling, the shared space. Lily still asleep across from her. Her body ached in small, honest ways. Not pain, just the weight of effort. She stretched carefully, feeling her muscles respond. Another day had begun, whether she was ready or not. Downstairs, the house would soon return to its rhythm. Cleaning, cooking, waiting, receiving. Each day followed the same pattern. Yet no two were ever quite alike. Mary had learned to measure time differently here. Not by dreams or plans, but by routines and survival. She rose quietly and dressed, moving with care so as not to wake Lily. The floor was cold again, but she barely noticed now. She had grown used to discomfort. It no longer startled her. As she washed her face, Mary caught her reflection in the small mirror. She studied it longer than usual. She did not see shame there, despite what the world might say. She saw endurance. She saw a woman who had made choices in a world that offered few. A woman who had adapted. That understanding had taken time. In her first months at the house, Mary had carried guilt like a heavy coat she could never remove. Each look from a stranger felt accusing. Each church bell felt like a reminder of what she was supposed to be. But hunger had taught her something important. Survival came before judgment. The house began to wake. Betsy Ayuro's light footsteps passed the door. The smell of porridge drifted upward. Mary wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the hallway, joining the slow movement of women starting their day. At breakfast, the table was quiet but calm. There were no dramatic stories from the night before. Just tired smiles and simple conversation. Someone mentioned the weather. Someone else laughed softly about a dream they barely remembered. Ordinary moments stitched together into something that felt almost like a family. Afterward, Mary returned to her chores, dusting, folding, polishing. These tasks grounded her. They gave her hands purpose when her thoughts wandered too far. She liked the feeling of clean surfaces. of order created where there had been none. Later that morning, while standing near the front window, Mary watched a young woman pass by outside. The woman wore a plain dress and carried a basket. She walked quickly, her face focused, her posture stiff. Mary wondered what her life was like. Whether she was rushing to work, whether she was hungry, whether she felt safe. For a moment, Mary imagined another path, one where her parents had lived longer, one where wages had been fair, one where a woman could work and still eat. The thought passed quickly. She had learned not to dwell on things that could not be changed. By afternoon, the house was quiet again. Mary sat on her bed and wrote a short letter on the paper she had bought the day before. She did not sign it with her real name. She never did. But the words were honest. She wrote to a younger cousin in the countryside, sending a little money folded carefully inside. Enough to help. Enough to matter. That, too, was part of why she stayed. Here she had means. Limited, yes, but real. She could help others avoid the choices she had been forced to make. As evening approached once more, Mary prepared herself again. The familiar transformation. The dress, the hair, the scent. She did it all calmly now, without resentment. This was work, not identity. A role she stepped into and out of as needed. That night was quieter than most. Fewer visitors, less noise. Mary found herself sitting by the fire, hands resting in her lap, feeling its warmth. She thought about the thousands of women like her across the city. Women whose stories were never written down. Women's history rarely paused to notice. They were spoken about in whispers, judged in sermons, used in debates, but rarely understood. Yet these women worked. They supported households. They sent money home. They survived illness, poverty, and loss. They built communities within the walls society pretended did not exist. Near midnight, Mary returned to her room and undressed slowly. Her body was tired, but her mind was calm. She slipped beneath the blanket and turned onto her side. Lily murmured something in her sleep, then settled again. Outside, the city carried on. Somewhere, a man stumbled home. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere, another woman made a choice she never thought she would have to make. Mary closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She did not know what the future held. Few women in her position did, but she knew this. Tomorrow, she would wake. She would eat. She would endure. And in a world that gave women like her so little, that endurance itself was a quiet, powerful thing. She let sleep take her, gently and fully, resting in the simple truth that she had survived another day in a forgotten corner of history.